Hey guys, it's Alex Torelli here in Barcelona for the 888 Poker Main Event. Today I'll be giving away 5% of my earnings on Facebook and another 5% on Instagram. To enter is super simple. One, just like my Facebook page, and two, tag 2 poker players that you know who will like this post. I'll be giving away 5% of my earnings here, but be sure to check out my Instagram at Alec Torelli because I'll be giving away another 5% there, as well as keeping you guys posted with live updates via Instagram stories. Thanks a lot for all your support. Let's win the main event.
Ask Alec.
Hey guys, what's up? Alex Torelli here. Today we're going to be talking about calling the clock in big hands, or just in general while at the table, especially when people are taking a long time. When is it appropriate to call the clock? And we're also going to talk about some of the new rules that the World Series of Poker just announced for 2017, which I personally am really excited about. I'm going to go over some of those here with you and then give my thoughts on these as well. After this video, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Leave me a comment below. I know this is definitely a controversial subject and everybody has their own opinion. So here are the highlights of the new rule at the 2017 World Series of Poker. Under the previous rule, participants were allowed to call the clock after a reasonable amount of time. And that reasonable amount of time became sort of this unwritten rule as 2 minutes. And they weren't really allowed to call the clock before this 2-minute threshold had passed. Now, in a lot of situations, that's prudent, but in some situations, it's completely unreasonable. Most notably, if you watched the 2016 World Series of Poker, there were situations with particularly Will Kassouf, where he was taking a very long time in situations that were completely unreasonable, such as it getting folded to him in mid-position and he's just tanking about whether or not to open pre-flop. So I understand that 2 minutes is a reasonable amount of time in certain situations, facing it all in on the river for your tournament life, fine. But when it's your turn to either raise or fold pre-flop, a standard automated decision, those should be pretty fast. So I love that they removed this rule because every situation should warrant a different amount of time. The second notable change, which I also absolutely love, is when the clock is called, it's up to the floor person's discretion for how much time they will give the person. Now, the usual time that was given when the clock was called was always a minute. Now, that's sort of unreasonable in my opinion, because if someone's taken 2 minutes to make a decision about whether or not to raise or fold pre-flop, like was happening in 2016, they shouldn't be given another minute to think about whether or not to open. It just stalls the game and it tilts everyone, and it's bad for poker. So I love that this rule was given to the discretion of the tournament directors, and they're even allowed to give 0 time. They're allowed to just say, you don't have any more time, 10-second countdown starts now, at which point your hand will be dead. So I love this second modification to the rule, and I think a lot of these rules are going to be contingent on correct implementation from the tournament staff. Because a lot of this is now left up to the discretion of the floor people, it's going to require higher level thinking from the floor people and them really understanding the nuances of the game and what the players want and what's best for the game and what the players' intentions are in order to make the correct decisions. I'm fully confident in Jack Effel, who runs the World Series of Poker, to train an excellent staff, and I'm very confident. I've spoken with him personally, like at the Poker Awards in February. We talked about this issue as well. I'm very confident that he has a very clear grip on doing this, and I'm really excited about the new changes that are coming for the 2016 World Series. The next couple rules that I'm also really excited about is that now the floor person has the authority to call the clock without a player doing it himself. I think this is very good because sometimes players are a little bit apprehensive about calling the clock, especially in a big event or on television at the World Series of Poker Main Event, for example, because they don't want to look bad, they don't want to put themselves out there. And so I really like that the floor person, who's usually watching and monitoring a lot of the tables or hearing things from players, now has the authority to do that himself without a player doing it. And I think that's really good, and they can sort of set the tone for what is appropriate. The last thing I love, and I think this is going to maybe go down as the Will Kassouf rule, is players, I'm reading this out of the World Series update, participants who appear to be deliberately stalling the progress of the game or who frequently call for a clock unnecessarily will be subject to penalties. So I think this might be known as the Will Kassouf rule. It's basically saying, this rule is intended to discourage stalling for an unreasonable amount of time for straightforward decisions, which I think is directly responsible, or 2016 World Series Poker is directly responsible for this change, and I think this was absolutely needed. Some people like the Hollywooding for the cameras. I don't know what it is, but I think that's a great rule, and it's all intended to speed up game flow. Now I'll give a little bit about my personal thoughts and just general things I think are appropriate and what proper etiquette is for calling the clock. My personal view is that people take way too long to make average decisions at the poker table. It's hard to say something, just a blanket statement about how poker is played around the world in every single game. But I think this phenomenon is especially true in tournaments. The problem is exacerbated tenfold in tournament poker. At the high stakes cash games that I play wherever around the world, the people play very fast, and I think they just are used to it. Like, no hand is that significant because it's a continuum. There's a lot of nuances to cash game that just keep the game flow going. No one decision is as important as a tournament decision. I get that, but people just play very fast. They also want to get a lot of hands in. So this problem doesn't really happen, and I never really experienced situations where the clock is needed to be called, and usually when it is, I feel like it's always fair. This might be my bias. I play some of the higher stakes games. I'm not as much sure about the lower stakes games where people just sometimes tank unknowingly or whatever. But in tournaments, this is a huge, huge problem. And I actually, in fact, I talked to a lot of the VIPs I play with and some of the pros that I play with, and a lot of them don't want to play tournaments simply because people take so long. I think that's the number one complaint that a lot of the VIPs that I play with have. And frankly, that's really, really bad, right? You don't want recreational players that otherwise would be increasing the ROI of the pros in a tournament, or making the tournament more lucrative, or just bringing more action into poker, have them not play because they're tilted that people take so long. The most ironic thing about this is that it seems that a lot of the times the players that take the longest are the people that play on the internet. And it's so weird because they play so fast. And I guess I understand, because when I first started playing, when I was playing a lot of internet poker and then I played a lot of live poker, it seemed like there was so much to process. But I do find that very, very ironic. Anyway, I think in tournament poker, the most ideal scenario would be to have a clock that was given for different streets, right? So pre-flop, if you're first to open, you have like 15 seconds to act, right? Like if you can't make a decision about whether or not to raise or fold in 15 seconds, I mean, it's just too long, right? Maybe 20 seconds, but you really shouldn't take that long. And then, if you have a bet on the flop or bet on the turn or bet on the river, you should be given an increased amount of time. We've also talked about other ideas where it's like chess, where a player is given a certain amount of time for the entire day, and they have that much time that they could take, and they could use it at their discretion. Similar to chess, they can make a move really quickly, like open to e4, they take 1 second, or they could take a long time to make a more interesting move. That could be another option. I think the problem with this is it still doesn't discourage unnecessary tanking in certain situations like pre-flop, and you also don't want people to have their tournament life be dead if they're just running out of time at the end of the day. I think that would be not a good rule. I've heard that proposed by some people, but I just don't think that this would be effective in a tournament. I think a much better solution would be either a shot clock tournament and just having shot clocks be a part of poker. I mean, they're a part of chess. Like, even though they're given 6 hours in a Grandmaster chess game, something like that, I could be butchering the time. They're given a long amount of time. They aren't given an unlimited amount of time. All professional athletes have time that is given to them to make decisions. In tennis, they have a certain amount of time between points where they have to get back to the line and serve again, otherwise they get a penalty. And you've seen that on TV where sometimes they're given a penalty for taking too long. To inbound the ball in basketball, same thing. They can't just sit there for 45 minutes waiting for the perfect spot to inbound. They have to inbound the ball. You get the point. I think having a reasonable amount of time for every decision you make is great. And I've seen a lot of good shot clock tournaments where players are given an extra time bank and they can throw those out. They're given an extra minute. And as the day or the tournament progresses, they get more and more of these time banks because the decisions get bigger, the stakes get bigger, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you could even do something like when you're in the money, you're given double the amount of time, or when you're at the final table, there's no time limits anymore. I'm open to these sorts of ideas, but I think having some form of concrete time that players are allowed to take in a given situation would be a good thing for poker as a whole. The challenge is obviously implementing it. It's very difficult, and I think there are some new technologies out where the dealers actually control how long each person has. And I think getting 30 seconds per decision is totally reasonable, and then you could get 10 1-minute time banks that you can use throughout the day, 20 of them or whatever, and that's totally reasonable. it could be argued that like, well, you know, people aren't going to take longer than 30 seconds anyway. But what I've found personally is when people's time is monitored, the collective psychology of the fact that everybody only has 30 seconds and the dealer is watching and monitoring you forces people, even subconsciously, just to act faster. And so it creates this collective game flow that ends up being faster and it is better for everybody. Let's face it, if you're a good player, if you're a winning player, you should want people to act faster. The difference in your skill edge between you taking 2 minutes to make a decision and you taking 15 seconds is very, very minimal. It's maybe like 5%. But the difference in you playing, you know, double the amount of hands is massive, right? So we should, as pros, as winning players, we should focus on what's really important. We should focus on wanting to play the most amount of hands possible, reducing our variance in poker. And this is not just good for the professionals, it's good for the amateurs too. They want a fun experience. And even though, you know, their win rate might be smaller because there's less luck when they play more hands if they're a losing player, their experience is better because they get to pick their spots more. They get to have more fun. They get to see more big hands. They get to be in action more. They get to gamble more. And that's maybe what they play poker for more than us professionals who play to have a good win rate. So I think having more hands dealt should be our ultimate objective for everybody in poker. And I think that would be the best thing for the game in general. I know there are going to be some doubters here that think, well, having more time is better to make better decisions. But I always turn to chess, which is a very comparative game, and look at how the best players in the world operate under different time constraints. As you know, speed chess is a very, very popular form of chess, and they actually have different ratings for speed chess than they do for classical chess or regular chess, where they're given not an unlimited amount of time, but 6 hours per game or something like that, where their time is not an issue. And if you look at how the best players in the world play speed chess, even bullet chess, where they're given 1 minute to play an entire game of chess, okay? They have to complete all their moves in 1 minute, or they get 6 hours. The best players in the world that do the 6 hour game are also some of the best players in the world that do the 1 minute game. And it's no coincidence that their decision-making process or their rating, even if you look at their chess rating, it's sometimes very similar between the classical chess and the bullet chess, or certainly speed chess, where they're given like 5 minutes per game. So I'm not advocating everyone takes 2 seconds per decision, but if we're given a reasonable amount of time, 15, 20 seconds, I think the edge that pros are giving up is going to be negligible to almost zero. And I think if you look at other industries, you'll see that people make very effective decisions under time constraints simply because they're just good at the game. So I think this is really an important rule. I'm very excited about this at the World Series. My biggest complaint with tournaments, a lot of the reason I don't play tournaments is it's just painfully boring, and it doesn't get exciting until the later stages where every hand is significant. And I think having this be at the forefront of their decision-making process and this new rule is going to be a great thing for poker. And I hope over time people just collectively start to play faster. It would be a great thing for poker in general. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Let me know in a comment below. Do you agree or disagree? Do you think this is good for poker? And also some suggestions. I mean, everybody is looking for optimal ways to facilitate the balance of having enough time to make a decision while making the player experience the best. If you guys have a way that you guys think you can do that, please pass them on to me. I know some of the people that are in power to make these decisions, and I'll be happy to pass along your guys' best suggestions. I would greatly appreciate that. So you guys might have ideas, please leave them in a comment below. I'll be monitoring this channel and responding with my thoughts as well. And thank you for watching this episode of Ask Alec. Subscribe to my channel. See you guys soon. Ciao.